Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei, coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. Coming up on today's program, the UN has adopted tough new sanctions against the DPRK or North Korea. Will Kim Jong Un respond by cutting short Trump's Christmas holiday with another test? I spoke with Gambian President Adama Barrow during his state visit to Beijing. I find out how China can help develop the Gambia's economy and infrastructure. Let's start our program with the UN's ramping up of pressure on the DPRK. China has called on the countries involved to exercise restraint and work to properly resolve the nuclear issue on the Korean Peninsula. The remarks came in response to the UN Security Council's new resolution against the DPRK, adopted on Friday.
It claims that this could reach as far as the U.S. mainland. The DPRK's missile test late last month flew the country right into a new round of sanctions.
It sends the unambiguous message to Pyongyang that further defiance will invite further punishment and isolation.
The Security Council on Friday adopted Resolution 2397 to tighten sanctions against the DPRK.
We define this sanctions resolution rigged by the U.S. and its followers as a grave infringement of the sovereignty of our republic and as an act of war violating peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula and in the region. We categorically reject this resolution.
China calls on all parties to implement the existing UN sanctions in a comprehensive and balanced manner.
China is always committed to realizing the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. China has put forward the proposal of suspension for suspension initiative and dual-track approach, seeks to resolve the issue through dialogue and consultation.
The resolution bans nearly 90% of refined petroleum exports to the DPRK, changing the annual cap on imports from 2 million barrels to 500,000. It caps crude oil imports at current levels of 4 million barrels a year. Member states are now also required to expel DPRK workers within 2 years.
Mr. President, the resolution adopted by the Council today reflects the unanimous position of the international community in opposing DPRK's development of nuclear and ballistic missile capabilities and in maintaining international nuclear non-proliferation regime.
The resolution also stressed that sanctions should not affect normal economic and diplomatic activities, as well as food and humanitarian aid. It also expressed support for the resumption of the six-party talks. This is the third such sanction this year and the 10th since 2006.
For more on the UN's new DPRK sanction, we are joining in our Beijing studio Zhao Tong, who is a fellow from the Carnegie Nuclear Policy Program based at the Carnegie Tsinghua Center for Global Policy. Welcome, sir. Joining us in Boston in the U.S. is Sun-Young Lee, a Kim Korea Foundation Professor of Korean Studies at the Fletcher School at Tufts University. Also joining us in the U.S. via Skype in Washington, D.C., Jonathan Pollack, a Senior Fellow at the Center for East Asian Policy Studies and the John Thornton China Center at the Brookings Institution. First of all, gentlemen, I want to say happy holidays for all of you. Thank you for joining us on the very morning of Christmas Day. And I want to say, of course, on the eve of Christmas Day for you, Mr. Zhao. I want to start with you. Mr. Zhao, how much impact will this round of sanctions of the UN Security Council really have on DPRK's decision to move on or not anymore?
Well, I think the sanction measures are very substantive, especially the refined oil products were cut by more than 80%. And also all North Korean foreign laborers are going to be expelled from third countries within 2 years. So those are real and biting measures, but the question is whether they are going to make North Korea completely change its nuclear policy. I don't see that happening.
Professor Lee, what do you think?
Well, the opening paragraph to each new resolution keeps getting longer and longer because there are 10, actually 12, previous UN Security Council resolutions on North Korea's missile and nuclear weapons programs. Will this have a positive effect in the near term? Absolutely not. It's the right thing to do, You have to build your case, share responsibility and a bit of blame with other UN member states, but I don't think the latest measure will deter Kim Jong Un in any meaningful way in the coming months. Sanctions take a lot of time to take effect, at least a year, probably 2 to 3 years. So the question remains, how will Kim react in the coming year, and how will the US and other UN member states do their best to enforce these tough sanctions?
It seems that every round of sanctions has witnessed some kinds of huge response from the North Korean side or the DPRK side. Take this year, for example. On June the 2nd, the UN imposed a travel ban and asset freeze on 4 entities and 14 officials. So what happened next? Then, on July the 4th, the DPRK claimed it had successfully tested its first ICBM. On August the 6th this year, UN banned DPRK's exports of coal and other raw materials, about a third of its export economy. In response, on September the 3rd, at least claimed by the North Koreans, that the DPRK tested a hydrogen bomb that they claim could be loaded with a long-range missile. So it seems there is action, reaction, these kinds of vicious cycle going on all the time. Mr. Pollack, are you worried, concerned that after this sanction, something else is going to happen?
Well, I think that the challenge here is, first of all, one of time and of trajectories. If North Korea continues its testing program, this will lead to subsequent rounds of tougher sanctions that will raise the cost to North Korea. But the question is whether, in the context of heightened sanctions, the actors in this process, including the United States and North Korea, can avoid an overt escalation to outright military conflict, which I think would be a disastrous outcome if we go down that path. So the question here is one of letting the sanctions take hold. It will take some time, I think, before they have a full effect. My understanding is that the initial estimates for 2017 is that the North Korean economy will shrink in 2017, perhaps by a significant percentage. So in that sense, I think it reveals that the tougher sanctions are taking a toll on North Korea. The question now is, will it compel North Korea to really recalibrate its strategy? And on that, we simply don't know, although the evidence to date is not encouraging.
Okay. Well, Mr. Zhao, several things. I heard about the so-called time frame in which the sanctions is likely to function eventually on the North Korean economy and probably on the DPRK's resolve whether to continue with this nuclear program or not. Some talk about 6 months, others talk about 6 months to a year, and now we heard from Professor Lee it's even 2 to 3 years. So it seems that the expansion of the time is ever going on, ever getting bigger. But the question really is, do we have wishful thinking? Because the fundamental interest of the DPRK is to protect its regime and also to continue its governance. And therefore, it would do whatever it takes in order to continue with the nuclear test and the nuclear development. Mr. Zhao, are we doing self-cheating in a way with so-called sanctions going to take effect and having an impact?
Yes, I think there is a serious problem with the illusion that with more sanctions, North Korea can give up its nuclear weapons. I don't see how we can do that through more economic pressure. If North Korea is really cut off from all economic relations with the outside world, if the North Korean government is really pushed into a corner, I think rather than simply backing down, North Korea is more likely to enhance its military provocations, believing that North Korea itself is better at playing brinksmanship, is better at taking risks than the United States. So in that situation, a very desperate North Korean government could indeed start to implement its previous military threats, including shooting missiles toward the waters near Guam. The problem is in that situation, international community, including the United States, doesn't have a good counter strategy. So we should be careful what we are asking for.
We should be very careful about what we should expect, in fact, after all these actions. And Mr. Polak, I want to come back to you as a result. So what should we expect? I mean, after all, this is a test of a consensus among countries of the international community as to how they want to face up to the nuclear issue on the Korean Peninsula. Okay, it's been tested once and again. There's sanctions after sanctions and sanctions after sanctions, even though the versions of sanctions could be varied from one time to the other. So after this testing of consensus, what else needs to be done? Probably we'll move to the next step. What is the next step for the United States? 2018 is coming.
Well, again, I think the United States has given off some mixed signals about what comes next. Some officials clearly believe that there is still time for some kind of a diplomatic process to develop, not under any illusions that abruptly North Korea is going to reverse course, but it's more a question of whether by these multiple means and by this heightened international cooperation, North Korea will impede or slow its process of development. It has been precisely the activation or the escalation of its testing program that has enabled this emerging international consensus. But I think that there is sobriety here. There is a real worry about the possibility of an accidental clash, and you know, on that basis, I think all involved actors have to be very, very careful with the words and actions that they do, in fact, undertake. So, well, in this respect, I'm hoping for more. There is a possibility of so-called the clash, Mr. Polak, but there is also the possibility of negotiation and talks. What about the latter ones? Probably the latter ones is even more interesting to look in if we talk about diplomatic solutions. Mr. Polak, very briefly from you. Again, I think it's important to distinguish between discussions of one kind or another and actual negotiations, because we have to ask ourselves, even if you presume that North Korea would be willing to enter a negotiating process, on what basis? North Korea says it must be accepted as a nuclear weapons state, and none of the other countries that are, you know, combining forces here to oppose North Korea's development accept the idea that there's any permanence or legitimacy to their nuclear weapons activities. So we are really confronting a situation of starkly conflicting objectives on the part of the involved actors. And again, I don't say that I don't see any easy resolution of that. I think we are in for a very extended process.
Professor Lee, of course, negotiations and talks could take place in so many different levels and layers, that some you would have so-called a precondition, and others you have those preconditions back away a little bit. So, Professor Lee, is there any hope of so-called talks without that much preconditions from both sides?
I think the chance, the possibility of return to negotiations from North Korea's point of view goes up with the next provocation. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but just looking at the calendar in the next 2 weeks, next weekend marks the 6th anniversary of Kim Jong Un assuming the top post of the nation's military. His birthday is coming up, which is January 8th. And in 2016, North Korea conducted a nuclear test just 2 days shy of his birthday. Of course, his New Year's Day speech is watched carefully by North Korea experts. So there are momentous occasions for Kim Jong Un to do another big provocation, raise the stakes, create a crisis atmosphere, and then back down. And I think South Korea especially will bite any kind of bait by Kim Jong Un to change the dynamics and return to talks at some kind of government level.
There are a lot of things happening, Mr. Zhao, over the next few weeks. In fact, if you're looking at the beginning of 2018, besides what Professor Lee just mentioned, there's also the possible of joint military exercise between South Korea and the United States, which is usually annual, but that is going to irritate North Korea as well. And certainly there's going to be the Winter Olympic Games for South Korea too. So that is going to be a big occasion for South Koreans. So with all of this, at the same time, within the next few weeks, Mr. Zhao, things are getting very tricky.
Yes, indeed. North Korea, after the Hwasong 15 ICBM test, has openly said it has completed its state nuclear force, implying probably that it no longer needs additional ICBM tests. So it was a signal of self-restraint. In response, we have seen North Korea proposing to the United States that maybe the joint exercises scheduled in February or early March should be postponed until the ending of the Olympic Games. I think South Korea has a lot of hope that we can really use these Winter Games as an opportunity to open some diplomatic opportunity with North Korea. Because these Winter Olympic Games provides a good opportunity for U.S. and South Korea to show some good gesture without appearing weak, because they can say they postpone or scale down the military exercises not because of North Korea but because of the Olympic peace. So that's a very rare opportunity. I think at this moment, China, Russia, and South Korea all agree that negotiations, talks with North Korea should start without preconditions. Today, the South Korean unification minister openly said so. So it's only the United States who doesn't want to talk with North Koreans without preconditions. I think it's really up to the United States to be more flexible in order not to squander this opportunity provided by the Winter Olympics.
Okay, a lot of people are looking at the United States and Mr. Polak, and not only that, what Mr. Zhao just mentioned, but also the United States in its national security strategy. Just 1 week ago had been talk about China in a totally different frame, and that certainly has created a lot of different kinds of ripples here in this country about whether China should really closely cooperate with the United States on the DPRK issue anymore. So, Mr. Polak, help us to understand what could be the core of interest for the United States in making one decision or another regarding the DPRK issue coming up in the year 2018.
Well, I think the activation of this issue, the focus of the Trump administration on this issue has definitely produced significant results, as we can see through now 3 rounds of the sanctions. But even so, there is in some American quarters a belief that the situation is urgent, that somehow time is running out. I think it's easy to kind of overstate the dangers and the risks, but it would seem that the administration believes that there must be no let-up on the pressure on North Korea, but at the same time, the administration expects China's much more active cooperation. I think China is doing much more today than a year ago, but the question is whether or not the United States will heighten that expectation of China in coordination with the United States at a time when, at some other levels, and you noted the national security strategy, there's a lot of that content which paints a very, very stark view of the future U.S.-China relationship. So the United States is trying to somehow, or the Trump administration is trying somehow to reconcile all these competing forces and factors. The question, though, is if this issue, if the North Korea issue has a particular urgency, is it not therefore necessary for the United States to cooperate very fully with China and, of course, with the Republic of Korea in a way to avoid or avert any possible very unwelcome contingency? And there are some indications that both governments and both militaries are prepared to go down this path more than in the past. So that's what has to be sustained, but sustained in a quiet, purposeful way, rather than highly agitated words that stimulate the North Koreans further and not in helpful ways at all.
We have seen some change of tones from many in Washington recently, in think tanks such as you and Mr. Polak, about the so-called use of force, even though you didn't use that word specifically. But Professor Lee, people here in China and in this part of the world just do not know where it comes from, because from the rhetorics and also from the policies, as well as people's understanding of the complexity of this issue, the use of force had never been and should never be one of those choices. Professor Lee, we all remember history, and we also know how complicated the situation is when it comes to nuclear security on the Korean Peninsula for its neighboring countries. So, Professor Lee, how should we understand this? Is this trying to use further pressure to put on China by going with the rhetoric, so-called the use of force? Or is this just putting a blind eye to the realities of the region and of history, Professor Lee?
I think the U.S. rhetoric is much based on sort of an academic model of graduated escalation. If North Korea continues down this road, then the use of force becomes a rational, in quotation marks, choice for the United States. But of course, to people who live in the Korean Peninsula and in the region, war is just inconceivable today. And I think Koreans next year in 2018 will try very hard, both the North and South Koreans, will try to seize the initiative, and I think Kim Jong Un will oblige. 2018 marks the 70th anniversary of the founding of the DPRK and the ROK, and by implication, liberation from the dreaded Japanese colonial rule. The Chinese talk of 中华民族, Chinese civilization, race. The Koreans have their own version, which is very strong, ethnic Korean bond and nationalism, and I think both South Korea and North Korea will play on those strong ethnic ties to try to take the leadership role in inter-Korean talks. And I think probably in 2018, this continuing mood of escalation and crisis and tension will be a bit mitigated.
Interesting view there. Not only between the two Koreas, but also China and Japan. You see relationship, according to the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi in his recent interview on CCTV, talk about the warming up of the possibilities. And of course, for China and South Korea, there has been certain kind of common consensus about the THAAD issue. So it seems that partners in the former six-party talks could have some kind of window opportunity. Warn me if I'm doing wishful thinking, Mr. Zhao, of coming together under certain circumstances. Is that flash of light going to happen, Mr. Zhao?
Well, I'm not very optimistic on that front, even though the China-Japan relationship is warming up. China-South Korea decided to move on over that dispute. China-U.S. relationship might encounter new problems. In the coming year, there are many signs that the Trump administration is going to impose more economic pressure on the bilateral trading relationship. And the new national security strategy doesn't give people hope that the 2018 will be a stable year for the bilateral relationship. And also Russia and the United States, they still have major issues in their own relations. But I do think there might be some reconciliation on the North Korean part. And if the other party of the six-party talks can seize upon that opportunity, that could really open something new.
Mr. Polak, your assessment?
Well, I think both of our other speakers have highlighted that if there's going to be some movement, it will be quite possibly on the part of more the local actors rather than any kind of an anticipated big breakthrough between the United States and North Korea. I think North Korea, for its own reasons, its own increasing economic pressures, I'm expecting the North to make some gestures that they have not made until now, not so much to the United States, but quite possibly to South Korea, and potentially, although less certain, with China, because North Korea doesn't have a lot of good options here. They're going to really begin to feel this growing economic pressure, so they have to put out some kind of a formula, not so much to conciliate the United States, but in a way that gives them, they hope, a little more running room with respect to relations with others in the region. That would be the hopeful possibility. But, you know, North Korea has a way of surprising us time and again. And what they're trying to do is find a way to separate this, if you will, this united front that has combined now in a significant way to oppose their development. They're good at this, of finding ways, options to undermine these coalitions. And I think that that's why it's imperative that all the affected powers communicate very candidly and very fully here, so that we can avoid that kind of an outcome.
All right. Usually, Professor Lee, you're always very good in bringing us some historical comparison at the end of our conversation. I really wonder, you know, when we are moving from 2017 to the 2018, we were still talking about this issue. We did that for years, and certainly intensely for the year 2017. What is coming to your mind at this point, Professor Lee? Final words.
In the near term, South Korea hosts the Winter Olympiad less than 2 months from now. I don't know how you would gauge the level of interest in the Winter Olympics in China, but here in the United States, it seems to me very few people are even aware of this major international sporting event that South Korea is hosting. It's unclear that President Xi Jinping will attend the opening ceremony. It's quite likely that Prime Minister Abe will not. It's likely that President Trump will not. So from an international perspective, it will not be a resounding PR success for South Korea. But South Korea can offset that if Kim Jong Un sends a few North Korean athletes and maybe some cheerleaders, and that really will change the dynamics in the region, and South Korea will have a stronger case to call on the United States to exercise restraint and return to negotiations with North Korea.
Let's just hope sports would unite people together. Well, we do not know about that, but, you know, at least for now, we have that wish for the year 2018. Thank you so much, Zhao Tong, San Yong Li, Jonathan Pollack. Best to you and your family for the year 2018. Thank you for being with us. And you're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program, I spoke with Gambian President Adama Barrow during his state visit in Beijing and find out how the Gambia has benefited from resuming ties with China and what about the future of the bilateral relationship. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei, coming to you Monday to Friday on CGTN. China and the Gambia have vowed to boost the bilateral ties in various areas. This comes after a meeting between Chinese President Xi Jinping and the visiting Gambian counterpart Adama Barrow in Beijing last week. China and the Gambia resumed diplomatic relations in the year 2016. Those ties have been severed, though, for 20 years when the African nation engaged in a so-called diplomatic relationship with China's Taiwan. However, the two presidents have now agreed to promote mutual political trust and reaffirm the primacy of one China policy. Now, President Adama Barrow has left Beijing, visited cities in Xiamen and Guangzhou, but earlier, I spoke to him about what he hopes to achieve between China and the Gambia. Reconnect again. What does this visit mean to you, and do you think to the two countries, China and the Gambia?
This visit is a very important visit as far as the China-Gambia relationship is concerned. I think China-Gambia relationship was back way in the 70s. And we have a very, very, very good relationship between China and the Gambia. I think the two countries also benefited from that relationship. But there was a break. I call it unfortunate. Unfortunate in the sense that it was a one-man decision. It was not the decision of the Gambian people. But now, both countries, we have the chance to recover from what we lost. So that's why this visit is significant, it's important. It's important to me as president, is important to the two countries.
Great to have you here in Beijing, Mr. President. Holding on to the One China policy, you took office last year and has been very dear to that principle. Why is it so strategically important for the Gambia about this?
The One China policy is important to the Gambia for the simple reason that we believe in unity. We believe in oneness. If we are together, we are stronger. It's because the Gambia, we are together. That's why we were able to change from dictatorship to democracy. That unity, that spirit was very important in our history. And we believe that One China policy.
Great point there, Mr. President. But you know, the thing is, the trust and mutual development has to be re-established. How can we start?
We have to be sincere. We have to be honest. We have to be open.
Honest about what?
Honest about our relationship. Honest to make sure we improve on our relationship. To make sure we have people from the two countries represented at our diplomatic level who will collaborate. And I think we are also fortunate that we have a young and dynamic ambassador from China who is representing in the Gambia, who is doing a wonderful job.
Mr. Ambassador is sitting on the side together with your administration officials.
I think that was a very good decision, and I think that is helping our relationship.
You talk about openness. What kind of openness are you referring to?
No country can do it alone. You have to be open, you have to be part of the world. We are in the 21st century. We need each other.
So you believe in globalization?
I believe in that. Fundamentally believe in globalization. And that globalization open that room of communication. If there is communication, it enlightens everybody. And at the end of the day, everybody benefits from that globalization.
You had a wonderful talk with the Chinese President Xi Jinping. And I saw some of the photos of your meetings. Beautiful smiles on both gentlemen's faces. I understand this is also about personal relationship in a way, between the two presidents, the trust, and also between the two countries, the mutual trust. Your country is rich with resources, tourism industries as well. Since you're taking the office, the country has enjoyed recently quite some stability. But how to translate stability into economic prosperity for your people? It could always be a big question mark. What is the answer from your administration so far?
But I think stability is very important. Stability is a foundation.
How would you guarantee that?
We have good policies in the country, whereby we have the independence of the judiciary. Rule of law is respected. It opens up the environment. People to trust the government. And that is our strength.
It's not easy, right?
It has not been easy. It's not easy. It's not about giving speeches. It's not about Marxists and Lenists. It's about action. But the mindset must change. That the responsibility is the Gambian people's responsibility. To make sure we work together, we implement those policies.
Is it easy to change that mindset?
One fundamental thing is important. Enlightening the people. If you enlighten the people, you have empowered them.
Give me some examples.
People must believe what they are. They must believe in where they come from. And we have to learn from others. we are in the same position in years back. For example, like China, and they have moved on, and they succeeded. I think these are the areas that we have to make sure the people understand.
So build the confidence in a way.
Believing that if other people can do it, there is no doubt we can also do it.
I understand, Mr. President, there are several areas of cooperation you and your Chinese counterpart, Chinese President Xi Jinping, have been talking about. What have you two gentlemen been specifically discussing? How will things be following up after this?
We are really welcome by the President. And as the second largest economy in the world, it was an honor and a privilege to have a meeting with such a great leader. We cannot thank the President enough for giving us the opportunity. It was all over the media. It was a vote of confidence. It was real support for us. But one thing was important in our discussion. That is where the Gambian strength lies. That is agriculture.
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 What about agriculture?
Our methods is primitive. We want to improve on our methods. We go in for mechanized farming. But we need partners. Partners like China. Because we need the support of people who have experience. We need to learn from them. Because we need two things. There is people who have the expertise and people who have the money. We have the land, we have the water, we have the manpower, and we have the political will. But we need that support. So that was very important because we believe that can create jobs for us. And it can also bring hope. So we have signed agreement, road construction, 2 bridges, that will create a lot of jobs. And also the broadband with our network, that will create jobs. I think these are areas that we will start to create jobs. And we have no doubt the Chinese government is very serious with our relationship.
We have the government consensus, but it has to be attractive for businesses to go there, to develop these projects. So what are some of the policies or preferential treatment your country would bring out to international investors, particularly, let's just say, those coming from China? They could be state-owned, they could be private investors, all kinds.
When we are going to partnership, energy, we give you duty waivers. So those are all incentives.
Do you see many Chinese investors there?
A lot of them. We know that Gambia cannot be isolated. We are in a global world. We have to open up and partner with genuine investors, for that matter.
Genuine investors. I like that adjective you just used. Why would you want to emphasize on that, the genuine investors? Who would, to you, be genuine enough?
That's why if you want to invest in my country, we go through your profile and we do some kind of due diligence to know your background, your company, your credibility, your capacity, before we can follow the process to do business with you.
What about the future? I understand, Mr. President, you, before the trip, said you were extremely impressed by the words coming from Chinese President Xi Jinping during the 2015 China-Africa Summit, which was held then in Johannesburg. And he talked about the future and the blueprint of relationship between China and Africa. Help us understand better about your view of China's role in this cooperation with African countries. And where is Gambia in that big picture?
China have brought in balance of power in the world. First time, if the West make a statement, you don't have any other alternative. But now we wait, we say, let us wait for China.
You will say that?
Of course. When they make their statement, that's the time now the debate open up. So it's a balance of power that is going in the world. And Gambia is part of the African Union, the AU. We are part of ECOWAS. That brought us together, that brought Africa together. And if China is partnering at that level, that means Gambia is part of it.
You believe in institutional building?
I believe in that.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, for being with us.
Thank you.
The Gambian President with us on an exclusive interview. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, find us at World Insight CGTN into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Happy holidays to everyone.